There are very few originals in wrestling, the ones who truly break the mold. When we think of these influential heroes, we often think of solo acts, guys like Buddy Rogers, Gorgeous George, Billy Graham, and so on. But when it comes to tag teams, perhaps no duo is more influential than the Road Warriors. I mean, everyone knows who the Road Warriors are. Wrestling fans, non-fans, they know. They're iconic. Even if you never saw them wrestle a match, you've definitely seen the scores of wrestlers they've inspired ever since. Hell, anyone who's ever walked through an arcade before can probably recognize them. Before Animal and Hawk, the whole trope of muscled up, no-selling, face paint-wearing brutes didn't really exist, but by the end of the 80s, they were an institution. And oh yeah, best of all, Animal was an early financial partner in Zubaz, which have since gone on to become the coolest pants of all time. Trendsetters. After years as one of wrestling's hottest acts, eventually the Roadies became unhappy with their status in WCW. Or at least, Hawk was unhappy and left, and Animal was forced to come along with him.
Screw this, I don't like the way they're treating Ellering. We're leaving, Animal. I said, Mike, I got 3 kids. What do you mean we're leaving?
For this tandem, it was finally time to accept a long-standing offer from Vincent McMahon to join his empire and continue their run of dominance in greener pastures. But was it all really a rush? Find out as we examine the ups and the downs
God almighty!
of the Road Warriors in the WWF. I'm sorry, couldn't help myself. Upon arriving in the World Wrestling Federation in 1990, the Road Warriors underwent a few cosmetic changes from the get-go. For starters, longtime manager Paul Ellering wasn't invited to the party just yet. It was probably a good call anyway, as babyface managers have never really been a cornerstone of the company formula. Then their trademark spiked shoulder pads went from a menacing black to a bright and shiny candy apple red, no doubt to make them look a bit less threatening and also for merchandising purposes. You know, I don't think colorizing the pads was a bad move at all. It's an evolution, a recognition of the passage of time. And hey, adding a splash of color didn't hurt the Nintendo Zapper any. But perhaps most interesting was the name change. No longer the Road Warriors, the duo was now referred to as the Legion of Doom. One reason given for their name change was that by the time of their debut, there were already 2 guys named Warrior on their roster. A problem that would happen again years later during the Federation's Steve craze of '98. But most confusing of all, even though they changed the team name, they still occasionally called the wrestlers Road Warrior Hawk and Road Warrior Animal. And at that year's Survivor Series, they teamed with the Ultimate Warrior and Von Erich and called their team the Warriors. Which is it, guys? The Road Legion of Doom Warriors made their debut in a big way in June of 1990, calling out the tag team champions Demolition. Right away, this stoked the embers of a dream match that had been demanded by fans ever since 1987, when Demolition immediately drew comparisons to the more established team. But history and hindsight tell us that Axe and Smash were able to transcend the label of mere imitators, partly because deep down they were 2 very different teams, and partly because Demolition was booked very well at the same time Animal and Hawk were on a downward trend in WCW. But that's all in the past. LOD survived Starrcade 87, they survived their heel turn in 88, they're rock solid, they're good to go for this dream match. LOD versus Demolition. Come on, baby, let's do it! Well, I would be excited for it. Then again, to this day, WWE has a long and storied tradition of giving the people what they want, sorta kinda. By the time the Road Warriors made it to the Federation, Axe had to slow way down in the ring for a time as a bad shellfish allergy led to lingering health issues. In his place would be new member Crush, and at SummerSlam 1990, Demolition's fiendish plan to regain the tag titles by obviously switching team members illegally and everyone else having to play dumb about it was thwarted by LOD.
That's Axe in there! How can you tell? Axe hasn't been in this match at all! He's fresh! He's just hammering away! Well, the hit back. He is kind of energetic.
After a few months of trash talking, house show fans finally got to see the epic encounter between these 2 teams, in the form of 6-man tags as all 3 demo members fought LOD and the Ultimate Warrior. Seems kind of weird for the world champion to basically play third wheel in this house show loop. Then again, playing backup to non-champion Hulk Hogan was just par for the course in 1990. The feud peaked at that year's aforementioned Survivor Series, when Smash, Crush, Animal, and Hawk got themselves DQ'd for brawling in the ring. Aside from a 5-minute match on Wrestling Challenge the following February, that was about all that TV fans got out of this fantasy encounter. And some fans say this kind of lame, unsatisfying booking is a recent phenomenon? According to legend, the original plan was for LOD to win the tag team titles at WrestleMania 7, which is expected to be a huge event. 100,000 screaming fans at the LA Coliseum, history to be made, only we now know it didn't end up quite how they planned it. As for the Legion, their title plans evaporated once the Federation signed the Nasty Boys away from WCW with the promise of their own reign. So perhaps as a consolation prize, Hawk and Animal went on to destroy Power and Glory in under a minute at the Showcase of the Immortals. Hercules and Paul Roma's push may have been drying up, but at least they went down in style. After spending months chasing the Nasties on the house show circuit, LOD finally beat Knobbs and Sags for the tag titles at SummerSlam 91, becoming the first and only team to win the AWA, NWA, and WWF Gold. Hawk and Animal's next danger on which to dine came in the form of the natural disasters, Earthquake and the newly turned Typhoon. The program went through Survivor Series in the 1992 Royal Rumble, but then at a house show that February, LOD suddenly dropped the belts to Money Inc., Ted DiBiase and IRS, who had yet to even officially debut as a team on television. Way to push those guys down our throats. The rumor was they were set to meet in a rematch of the titles at WrestleMania 8, but just days after the title change, St. Louis police hit the locker room at a house show in an attempted drug raid. Though no drugs were found and no one was arrested, Hawk and Animal, Kerry Von Erich, and Jimmy Snuka were all suspended, forcing Quake and Foon to hastily turn face so Money Inc. could have opponents for the biggest show of the year. In a bit of irony, the Disasters would go on to win the belts from DiBiase and IRS at a house show after a reign just 1 day shorter than LOD's. Useless facts. Just because they happened doesn't mean they matter. Unfortunately, Hawk would be suspended on more than one occasion for drugs, leading to both men being off TV for months at a time. But in mid-92, a wrong was finally made right when their manager, Precious Paul Ellering, was brought in to work alongside them yet again. Not sure from a kayfabe standpoint why they had to be back together, since the LOD lost maybe once so far in the Federation. They were doing fine.
Hawk and I had to come deep within ourselves. Come back to our roots, like Paul Ellering just said. I am the detail man. I take care of the details.
That's right, the LOD were going back to their roots, back to the gritty, badass days of old, where they wouldn't take no guff from anybody and would become hang on, who or what is that?
I can't believe this. This is the guy we toasted to all these nights. Every night. Here's
Rocco, and you never knew who he was.
No, it's not a dead kid in Ellering's arms, but Rocco, the ventriloquist dummy that apparently helped little Hawk and Animal navigate their way through life. In this vignette from a June episode of Superstars, Ellering comes up with a bright idea that would ultimately spell the beginning of the end.
Let me bring Rocco to the ring.
Let's bring him everywhere with us.
Let's clean him up.
Let's do it now.
If I didn't know any better, I would think these guys were all a little bit hesitant and just daring each other to go through with it here.
Let's clean him up. Yeah, we'll do that. Let's take him to the ring with us. Oh, absolutely. I'm totally on board with that. Well, what are we waiting for? Oh, you were serious? Oh, I'm just here for us to relish this moment. You know, you're finally here, reunited with Rocco after all these years.
The moment's been relished. Let's go.
Okay. All right, man. Whatever you say, let's do this.
You should make him talk in a funny voice, too.
All right, seriously, dude? Seriously. A voice? Okay, but you're not gonna like it.
Rocco was the brainchild of Vince McMahon, did you even have to ask? Made with the sole purpose of selling merchandise to kids. The fact that the gimmick bombed right out the gate at a house show should have been a warning sign, but nope, they went right along with it anyway. But how do you not love Rocco, since it makes so much sense for these badasses to hang out with this Howdy Doody meets Deuce and Domino, and oh, what about the stellar ventriloquist act by Ellering?
Like, when you dine at the Devil's house, man, you don't have to worry, because you can't choose from the menu.
An eye on things. There's Rocco.
Ah yes, I believe I can hear those registers ka-chinging away as we speak. Music to my ears. I believe that Animal, Hawk, and Ellering should all get an award for being the most patient athletes on the planet, because besides Vince, no one thought this was a good idea, especially the fans. Silly gimmicks like this do have a chance of survival if the wrestlers commit to them, but it's safe to say these guys did not.
I hated that puppet. I wanted to rip the head off that puppet so many times.
They spent all summer having to share screen time with this stupid thing up until SummerSlam 1992. While Hawk was so doped up that afternoon that it's a miracle their match wasn't all that bad, fans were unknowingly witnessing the end of the Rocco experiment as the precocious puppet somehow vanished after the UK trip.
That puppet actually got lost mysteriously with the airlines, I'll tell you that right now. Actually, right after SummerSlam, that thing was gone.
But Rocco wasn't the only member of LOD to go AWOL in London, as Hawk decided not to take the return flight to the US. Instead, he spent several days hanging out with the local chapter of Hell's Angels before quitting the company, leaving Animal to briefly partner with the new tropical punch-flavored Crush. Hawk's quitting meant the end of the LOD, wrestling apart for the first time since 1983. Hawk left for Japan to create a new version of the team with Kensuke Sasaki, while Animal hurt his back wrestling a handicap match against the Beverly Brothers, strangely enough, also in Japan. Useless fact, there's somebody's Trivia Night winner. Animal's injury put him on the shelf for several years, but the two finally reunited in 1996, back in WCW for a spell before apparently leaving over money issues. In February of '97, the Legion of Doom finally returned to the WWF and would fight alongside Ahmed Johnson against the Nation of Domination at WrestleMania 13. The Chicago Street Fight was a big hit with the Windy City faithful in attendance, one of the more memorable matches on a mostly forgettable Mania. Oh, God, hey, calm down. I said mostly forgettable. A program with Owen Hart and the British Bulldog over the tag belts led to their involvement in the big tag team main event at that year's Canadian Stampede, but then an accidental slopping had them reset their sights on the Godwins. The entire October 13th, 1997 episode of Raw was devoted to LOD, their history, their record of dominance, and their pivotal tag title match against Henry and Phineas, win the belts or break up for good. The main event was a redemption story for the ages, as Animal dodged a horseshoe attack before winning the match and the titles. And then it was suddenly out with the old and in with the new.
This is where our journey starts, and it ends with the World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Championship belts.
As recently mentioned on this channel, right around this time, fans saw the formation of the New Age Outlaws, as Jesse Jams and Rockabilly were unsatisfied with their singles careers. The Outlaws picked the tag champs as their first targets, and the whole angle was built around the fact the LOD were too old for this hip company. How can you call these guys old and washed up when they just won the tag team titles right after they cut a promo trying to shut down the argument that they're too old?
No, we're not going to be like some guys who relied on our laurels in the past that can't cut it today, like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage.
Oh, and it's worth pointing out, Animal was 37 years old here, and Hawk was 40. That was considered old and over the hill at that point in the WWF. Do you know how many guys in their mid-30s and 40s are wrestling today in WWE and are never referred to as such? Funny that. But in a way, the LOD were yesterday's news. They were some of the biggest veterans in the locker room, and Animal and Hawk did come off as dated when everybody else was getting that slick attitude era sheen. By the fall of '97, the Federation was undergoing a major shift in tone and booking philosophy, and just 7 weeks after their Cinderella story, Animal and Hawk lost the belts to Road Dogg and Billy Gunn, their first of 6 tag team titles together. In hindsight, it would turn out to be a sea change for tag team wrestling in the company. After failing to regain the belts, the LOD found themselves the victims of a DX beatdown, the kind that would have been unheard of a decade ago. A teased breakup was soon forgotten about because guess who came back with a new coat of paint?
LOD! It's LOD! Hey, we're back!
Meet LOD 2000, where our heroes got an updated look for the modern age, wearing helmets to the ring, wearing new gear, and now being managed by Sonny. Though the changes seemed kind of silly, it wasn't nearly as bad as, say, superstar Billy Graham as a karate master. With their new look, the two won the Tag Team Battle Royal at WrestleMania 14 to earn a shot at the tag titles, but would come up short. Sonny was gone from the company a few months later, but the WWF wasn't done removing the luster from this team's good name yet, as they added Droz to the ranks. Darren Drozdov was briefly given the name Puke, based on his unique talent of vomiting on command, except when asked to do it on the spot for a documentary.
He's gonna puke! He's gonna puke! He's gonna puke!
I don't like how the name broke from the pattern. You got Animal, right? And then you've got Hawk, which is a kind of animal. Why not keep going down the line and name Droz after a part of the animal, like Talon or Beak? At around the same time, Precious Paul was also brought back into the fold, only to immediately turn on his guys for no reason.
I want to introduce you to my new team, 8-Ball and Skull!
In a move that must have made sense to somebody, Ellering aligned himself with the former Jacob and Eli Blues, Skull and 8-Ball, the disciples of Apocalypse. He'd rant about putting the horses out to pasture while also keeping his finger on the pulse of modern technology.
Twins, I only have to program one mind. It is the era of the computer. It is the era of the web. It is the era of DOA.
I buy that. Oh, but could you also sound like an old dial-up modem when you talk to just really get the angle over? This feud was an experiment in time distortion. Not only did the feud last for months, sometimes individual matches within it would feel like an eternity. But it turns out they weren't nearly done pushing the boundaries of good taste, as apparently the WWF saw what WCW was doing with Scott Hall around the same time and just had to get a piece of the action.
72 pounds, Legion of Doom member, Hulk! My God, Hulk is pulling a Kerry Collins.
At around this time, the company decided to exploit Hawk's real-life substance abuse problems in a storyline, not unlike what they did with Jake Roberts in 1996 or Jeff Hardy for the last decade or so. He would act erratic, stumble around and slur his words, cost his partners matches, and become more and more undependable. It finally reached a breaking point when Animal and Puke turned on him. Maybe this wouldn't have been so bad or hard to watch if Hawk wasn't actively dealing with those problems at the same time in real life. In one of the most shocking moments of the Attitude Era, a despondent Hawk climbed the Titantron and threatened to jump, as Animal and even recent rival Paul Ellering tried talking him down. Droz climbed up in an apparent effort to talk some sense into him when...
Get a shirt, no! Oh, what? God almighty! Good God, he fell. Folks, tragedy has struck here on the War Zone.
Look, the prospect of a character dying on air might be cool and hip if you're a fan of Impact Wrestling in 2020, but I don't think fans were ready for that in '98. Even for Vince Russo, this felt like it was going a bit too far. Apparently just sending the poor guy to rehab was too classy an option, so they had to pull this stunt. Though they originally approved of the storyline, Hawk and Animal came to hate it so much it was abruptly dropped, as Hawk returned a few weeks later with his arm in a cast and implied that Droz was his pusher in more ways than one. Animal would finally break up with Droz, and he and Hawk would make a few more sporadic appearances into early '99 before their contracts quietly expired. Though the Road Warriors would continue to find work in Japan, Australia, and Orlando, it seemed as if that terrible angle would be the last thing fans would remember about them in the World Wrestling Federation. But fast forward to an episode of Raw from May of 2003, when the LOD were the surprise challengers for Kane and RVD's World Tag Titles. After a thunderous nostalgia pop came a lackluster match, a sub 5-minute bout where it looked as if the two might have lost a step. The match was essentially a tryout, but they didn't make the cut. Hawk would sadly pass away less than 5 months later at the age of 46. After the sudden death of one of its members, that meant the end of this legendary tag team. The Legion of Doom, the Road Warriors, whatever you want to call them, were now no more. Until they had a DVD to sell. July 14th, 2005, weird babyface Heidenreich is getting mugged by Eminem. For literally no reason, he's rescued by a returning Animal who wants a shot at the tag team champions. Then, Nitro and Mercury go there.
It's gotta be Eminem against the Road Warriors!
We can't do that, Joe. Why not? Because his partner's dead.
What the hell was with the mid-2000s and their obsession with reminding us of dead beloved wrestlers? A partnership was lazily made on the spot, and less than 2 weeks later at the Great American Bash, Animal and Heidenreich won the tag team championships in a match that was dedicated to Hawk. Heidenreich changed his appearance to better suit the LOD look and was eventually christened an official member. And to top it all off, Christy Hemme became their valet. It was a derivative of a derivative. I'm not saying it didn't get over, because it did at first, but no matter how hard they tried, they were never going to be able to capture even a fraction of the original Road Warrior magic. It all just felt so cheap because it coincided with the release of a DVD, like this is how they're going to market the thing. Yes, go watch this DVD and be reminded of the fact that the stuff we're putting out now isn't as good. I was shocked to remember that these guys held the belts for around 3 months before dropping them back to Eminem. Heidenreich's release in early 2006 meant this clunky reboot was no more, and after a one-and-done partnership with Matt Hardy, Animal turned heel. Things had finally come full circle when Animal was rebranded as the Road Warrior, with a look similar to the one he and Hawk debuted with 23 years earlier. But aside from having the most amazing Titantron of him snorting out his logo every 10 seconds, he did nothing else of note before being released in June of 2006. So, were the Legion of Doom really done dirty in the World Wrestling Federation? Like so many of my other topics, I guess it depends on your perspective and what you consider to be good treatment and poor treatment. Obviously, the biggest knocks in their time in the company were Rocco and the Tasteless Hawk storyline years later, and the reboot in 05 was extremely tacky. Those things were terrible, the kind of stuff that would have killed any other team 2 times over. Fortunately, the Legion of Doom lived in that rarefied air where after a while, nothing really harmed their reputation. The two were insanely over no matter what and were merchandising cash cows. They were a huge presence on TV in spite of multiple infractions by Hawk in their first run. And at least in the first half of their later stint, they were generally finally given the respect that comes with being modern legends like they were. Their time in the WWF might not have been as iconic or as dignified as it was in the NWA or Japan, but the bright points they did have served to enhance an already stellar career in wrestling. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.